Good morning and regards from sunny California. The weather here. No muggy Baltimore weather. Loving it. Hope you're all well. Hope everyone is well. We're up to Ayin Dalid Amud Aleph. We are up to the two dots. Tan Rabbanan. Our learning is Lila Nishmas Mindel Mariam Bas Kalman Ruven. Today we're going to have an exceptionally relevant Gemara, all about borer. Borer is the act of separating, taking things one from another. We're going to learn the parameters, some of the parameters of this halacha today in one Amud. We'll pull out the different practical applications as we go through it. Okay, Tan Rabbanan. So there were different types of foods in front of a person. So this type of food and that type of food, and foods that you want and foods that you don't want. So apples and pears or carrots and cucumbers, and there are things that you do want, things that you don't want. Borer v'ochel, borer meniach. You're allowed to take what you want and eat it, or you're allowed to take what someone else wants. That's what it means, borer meniach, meaning if I'm there with my child, let's say, and they it's too much for them to figure out how to get it, or they can't reach it, so I could take the things that they want out of this pile, even if it's not for me, it's for someone else's eating. That's not an issue of borer. V'lo yivrar, then the Brisa says, but you cannot select. Okay, so this Brisa is a little bit confusing. It says you could select, but you can't select. And if you did select, you're going to be liable for a chatos. This Brisa needs some explaining. We're going to spend the next few minutes trying to suggest different interpretations of what this brisa means. We're going to reject most of them, but in the process of these different suggestions, we're also going to learn quite a few halachos, okay? So again, the beginning of the brisa says you're allowed to do borer. The second part of the brisa says you cannot do borer. Which one is it? Okay, so my kamar, what's this brisa saying? Amar ula, approach number one. Hachi kamar, borer v'ochel levo vayom, uvare meniach levo vayom. You're allowed to select for someone else for eating on that day. So let's say I do borer in the morning. I take a mixture of, there's a mixture of different types of foods. Let's say I have a mixture of baked schnitzel and fried schnitzel. Yeah, and I want to go ahead and I want the fried one because I have a bunch of teenagers who want to eat the fried schnitzel. So I go ahead and in the morning before I go to shul, Shabbos morning before I go to shul, I take those out from the baked ones and I put those on the side for later. That's what you're allowed to do. Lumachar liyivra. But if I'm preparing for tomorrow, that I can't do. And if I separate the fried ones for Sunday, that I can't do. If I do that, that's called borer. That's called separating. That's not called eating. And I'm going to be chayv chatas. Now, asks Rav Chisda, if there's an issue with selecting, if this is called a malacha, selecting is a malacha, then am I allowed to, let's take another malacha, another prohibited activity, like baking. Am I allowed to say, does anyone ever entertain the possibility I could bake for today? Could I cook for today and just not cook for tomorrow? Of course not. In other words, if something is prohibited, it doesn't matter if I'm doing it for today or for tomorrow. Now, we'll come back to this idea, but I guess you could say, if I may say, that Ula is onto something. What Ula is getting at is the fact that there is a prohibited activity called separating. Separating means I have a pile and I'm going ahead and I'm storing things. I have like the blues and the greens, or the baked and the fried, and I want to go ahead and I want to separate them, and ultimately the goal is to put this away and to put that away. That is a malacha, that is a prohibited activity. But every time I eat, by definition, I'm separating two things, one from another. Whether I'm taking, a piece of chicken from the bone, or I'm taking a carrot from among a bunch of vegetables, I'm always separating. So what we're going to be looking for is to distinguish between separating and eating. When something is in the process of eating, it's no longer the prohibited activity. So what Ula was trying to get to, which ultimately we reject, is says if it's done during the same day, that's called still an act of eating. Now, they reject that, and we'll see there's going to be something similar where we say if something is close enough, the act of separating is close enough to the eating, then it's still part of the eating process and not called separating. Okay, so that's what the framework of borer versus not borer is. This: am I eating right now or am I separating? If it's considered part of the eating process, then it's going to be typically allowed. We'll see with the parameters. And if it's not part of the eating process or too early for the eating process, then it's not going to be called eating, it's going to be called separating. Okay? Elam Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda gives another interpretation for what this cryptic brisa meant. Again, the brisa started off by saying you could separate, and then it said you can't separate. So Elam Rav Chisda bar v'ochel pachas mikashir, bar meniach pachas mikashir, v'chashir lo yivra. So the way he interprets this is the first lines are saying you're allowed to do borer if it's less than the appropriate measurement. So typically the measurements on Shabbos are about the size of a fig. Okay, so you're allowed to do borer if it's less than a fig, but if it's more than a fig, you can't do so. And if you did select this measurement, the measurement that is forbidden, then you have to bring a chatas. Maskal for Yosef. So if Yosef rejects this one, he says, let's use another malacha. When it comes to baking, can I put in a small, very, very tiny cake? Am I allowed to do that? No. I might not have to bring a korban chatas, but it's not permitted. The first part of the brisa says mutter. Mutter means it's allowed. So how do we understand that? So Elam Rav Yosef, bar v'ochel bayad, bar meniach bayad. What it means is you go ahead and you separate Morning. What it means is you separate by hand. You're allowed to separate for someone else by hand. But you're not allowed to select with a funnel or with a large plate. Okay, those are, when you separate a funnel or a large plate, those are like abnormal, irregular types of ways of doing separating. And if you do separate with those items, then it's forbidden, but you are going to be exempt because anytime you do malacha in its irregular fashion, it is permitted. However, but you can't go ahead and use a sieve or a fine sieve or coarse sieve. And if you did select with a sieve, then you're going to be chayv chatas. Okay, so that's how he's understanding the brayso. The brayso is basically saying you could separate by hand, but if you separate with a tool that's irregular, then it's forbidden. But you don't bring a chatas, and if you separate with a regular separating tool, then it is fully forbidden. Okay, so now the Maskil Rav Hamnuna asked a question on this. Midei kanon v'tamchay ketani. It doesn't say anything about the funnel wide plate. In other words, this brisa, like you're reading too much into this brisa, and therefore this can't be the interpretation. He's going to give another interpretation. Let's pause over here because we're rejecting this approach of Rav Yosef, not because it's halachically incorrect. Whereas the early ones were rejected because they're halachically correct. Here we're rejecting it because it doesn't read well into the brisa. So the halacha actually is exactly that, and that is that a person certainly can't use separating types of utensils. To use a sieve on Shabbos, that is completely usher. That would be something you'd have to bring a chatas for. To use any utensil that is meant to separate is going to. So similarly, you have like those slotted spoons. That also would be full-fledged, midoraisa aser. Other tools which would be used to separate, which are irregular, which are not typical separating types of tools, there it's aser, but you wouldn't bring chayv chatas. So again, any tool, anytime you're using any utensil, you cannot use any utensil when you're trying to separate things. Okay, so this leads to the obvious question: what about a fork and knife? When I go ahead and I eat my chicken, I'm separating. I'm taking the chicken, which is the good, from the bad, the bone, but I'm using my fork and my knife. So why am I allowed to do that? Right? It should be aser. Anytime I use a utensil, we just saw from Rav Yosef that it's forbidden. Right? So why are you allowed to do so? So the poskim explain that when you have regular cutlery is seen as an extension of my hands. Meaning, if we lived in the medieval era, then we won't use cutlery. We just use our fingers and just jump into the meat, the chicken, whatever it is. But we live in a civilized society, and therefore we use a fork and a knife. Fork and knife are just an extension of my hand to keep my hands clean and to help me with the grip and to help me with pulling things apart. But it's just an extension of my hands. Whereas when you have a tool, let's say you have that big slotted spoon, that's not an extension of my hand. That's already a utensil. It's like a long thing. That's not so typical. Cutlery, that's going to be an extension of my hands. Things with, things which are not cutlery, that's already seen as a tool, utensil, and you cannot use it for separating at all. Okay, so very important principle when it comes to separating. Although, there's many people use the following. They say good from the bad and biyad miyad, which means with your hands and right away. Okay, so when I say with your hands, doesn't mean literally with my hands. It could mean even a fork and knife or a spoon, because those are just seen as an extension of my hands. Okay, but we still have to figure out what this brisa means. What it does mean is you could take the good from the bad. Ochel mitoch hapsolas, good from the bad. You could take the good from the bad not only for yourself, but if you're going to be feeding someone else. Psolas mitoch ochel yivrar, but you can't take the bad from the good. Vimbira chayv chatas, and if you did take the bad from the good, you are chayv chatas. Now, Maskiv Labai asks a question on this interpretation. Midei ochel mitoch psolas katani. It doesn't say anything explicit about food being removed from the waste. That can't be the interpretation of the brisa, but we do learn he's rejecting this approach because it doesn't read into those words. But the halacha is true, and that is that when it comes to separating, we don't take the bad from the good. So if let's say you have a basket full of different items, and you want to serve, let's say it's a mixture, a basket of fruit, and you want to serve certain fruits, so you can't take the ones you don't want out. Right? To do that, we'd be taking the bad from the good. What you have to do is take the ones you do want and put them into something else, right? That would be the way to do it. Take what you don't want out is bad from the good. So you're always not trying to make sure you're not taking the bad from the good. You're always trying to make sure you're taking the good from the bad. Whenever we have a mixture of any sort, you're always trying to take the good from the bad. Okay, so Elam Rabaya. So what is the meaning of the brisa? Okay, Borav ochel alter uvarach meniach la'alter ulevo vayom le'yivrar. Okay, so what it means is you're allowed to separate and eat right away. Separate for someone else's eating for them to eat right away. Ulevo vayom lo yivrar. And if you separate for later in the day, you can't do so in beer. And if you did so, nasik var la'otzer, it's as if you separated it to store it. If I separate in the morning for a meal I'm having at lunch, right? So if I go ahead and I start, taking. I'm trying to think of a good example. Whatever the example might be. I'm preparing for a meal. And let's say a good example is forks and knives in the dishwasher. Okay, so you have a pile of silverware in the dishwasher. So that's a mixture of different items, and you want to separate them because you want to set the table. So you want to put forks over here and knives over here. So let's say you take the stuff out of the dishwasher. Okay, so you take a big pile of forks and knives, and it's a mixture, and you want to set the table. So if I'm setting the table to be for eating right away, then that's called part of the eating process, and that would be allowed. But if I'm separating them in the morning, like 4 hours before my meal, that's not right away. So I can't go ahead. So if I'm taking it out of my drawer and everything is separated, the forks, the knives, everything into different slots, and I can take those out. There's no separating because they're all separate already. If I'm taking it out of the dishwasher, I'm setting the table in the morning for a meal that's not going to take place until a few hours later. That's aser. B'chayv chatas. That's the last words. Now towards the end of Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, I'd be chayv chatas in that case because that is separating, not for right away. The post can point out right away doesn't mean like immediately. Right away means the time that it takes to prepare for the meal, like on an ongoing basis. Let's say you're preparing for a big meal. It's going to take, 2 hours, whatever. You're preparing for just 2 people eating. It takes 20 minutes. Whatever the amount of time it takes to prepare a meal, but that's the amount of time that's called miyad. That's called right away. So it doesn't mean like literally I separate and then I use it right away. And again, as you saw the example I just gave, it's not just about food. It's about all items, right? Any item that is a mixture, there will be an issue of borer. It's not just food. Anytime you have a mixture, you have to take the good from the bad. You have to take and you have to do so immediate. By immediate doesn't mean immediately as I eat it, but immediately means in the preparation, the normal time it takes to prepare for a meal, and biyad, but not literally in my hands, but I can use utensil as well. Okay, Amra Abana Kameda Rava Amr Lahu Shaper Amr Nachmani. When the rabbi said this explanation in the name of Abaye about this brisa, Rava said, "Excellent, Nachmani," which is the nickname, or Nachmani, the nickname of Abaye. He said well. So let's just take the principles out of here. So basically, what we're learning is you're not allowed to take the bad from, if you have a mixture of different items, whether they are food items, whether they're not food items, you can only take what you want out of the pile. Anytime you're taking what you don't want, that's a problem. Anytime you're just separating things, separating, even if you're taking, just like setting a table, or let's say you take the dishes out of the dishwasher and you're just putting things away, that's also problematic, because the only thing you're allowed to do is anything that's considered part of the eating process. So if I'm taking what I want and then using it right away, then that's allowed. But anytime I'm just putting things away, that's not being used for my usage, so it's not going to be allowed. So again, I have to do it. I have to take what I want anytime what I want, meaning I'm going to be using it right now. That's number one. So this means there has to be some usage for me for this item. Okay. B, it has to be done biyad, with one's hand or an extension of a hand, meaning forks and knives. Like you use that as the cutting utensils, and miyad. And immediate, by immediate, it has to be done within the time frame it would take. Either immediately I'm about to eat it, or immediate in the sense that, sorry about the background noise, immediate means like in the time frame that it takes to prepare for this meal. Okay. Okay, let's get into another case of borer, and then we'll wrap up borer. 2 types of foods. A person separated, and a person left it over for others to eat. Okay, so Rav Ashi Masni Pat. Rav Ashi says about this case, the person is exempt. Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti Masni Chai. Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti says you are liable. Okay, so this case also is a little bit unclear. What's the case we're talking about? So Rav Yirmiyah Medifti, we're going to assume that he understands this case as a case where the person did borer with, took the bad from the good, let's just say, and that's why he'd be chayav. Or he did it with a utensil, and that's why he's chayav. Rav Ashi must be pater, vatani chayav. How does Rav Ashi learn pater? So the Gemara said, why does he say pater? Pater means that it's forbidden, but you're exempt. So lokasha habakan v'tamchay habenafa v'chbara. So vatani chayav. So the brisa that taught earlier you were chayav, that's when you did it with the proper utensil. Rav Ashi, when he said pater, he's referring to a case where a person did borer, but not the proper borer type of utensil. Okay, one more important, two more halachos, one that's going to be very relevant for us. Kiyas Rav Dimi Amar Shabbos Rabbi Bibi Havai. Okay, so when the student in the yeshivas, the way it worked is that one of the students, he would have what we call sheirut. He would be serving the other students. And when I went to Karen B'Yavna, that's what we used to have. We used to have like this rotation where different students would serve, take off, whatever it was. So it was the Shabbos of Rabbi Bibi. Okay, Ve'iklu Rabbi Amir Rav Asi, Rav Amir Rav Asi were visiting. Shada Kamayo Kakal Deferi. Rabbi Bibi threw a basket of fruits before everyone. Is it because he holds that taking good from the bad is forbidden? Or is he intending to serve generously? Okay, so basically he comes in, Rabbi Bibi's serving, and he has this big pile of fruits. The fruit are mixed in with leaves. Okay, so you have to do some separating. So what they're not sure is, why is he dumping this basket in front of them? Okay, so that they knew that story. They knew, remember when Rabbi Bibi threw a basket, poured out a basket in front of Rav Amir Vasi? Why did he do so? So Is it because you just want to be generous and give them, hey, here's everything, and like give them everything, because like Rav Amir Brasi, you're a big Talmidei Chacham, he wants to give them everything, or because he held that in the preparation for him to start going ahead and taking the good from the bad in preparation for a meal, that would be asur. Now we ultimately ruled that it's permitted in the preparation. If they, let's say you had a pile of fruit and leaves, and you wanted to prepare for a meal, you'd be able to take the fruit out of the leaves or the fruit out of some other thing it's mixed into, because as long as it's right before the meal, that's permitted. But what we do learn from here is a very important thing, and that is when you have a mixture. Okay, so and you want to put things away. So what do? You know, if you want to put things away, that's not called the eating process. I'm putting it away. That's storing. That's certainly asur. So let's say the classic example is, let's say you finish playing Monopoly on Shabbos. Let's say you're allowed to play Monopoly on Shabbos. Big discussion. But let's say you played some game with a whole bunch of different pieces that are all mixed together, and now you want to put them in their individual things. So what do? You know, if you start separating them, putting them away, asur. It'd be asur. It'd be absolutely forbidden. So what could you do? What you could do is I mean, this is a little weird to do with a Monopoly game, but this principle would work better with silverware. Let's take silverware. Okay, so you took your silverware out of your dishwasher and you want to put it away, but if you start putting the forks in this thing and the knives in that thing, then that's bar. So what you do is you take all the silverware and spread it out. Just spread them all out so they're not like together, they're not a pile anymore. And once they're separated, then you could take different things one from another, because it's no longer a mixture. It's only asur when you have a mixture. But if you break up the mixture, it's not a problem. So let's say you have my basement after every Shabbos is a complete mess. So if all the games are intertwined with one another, then I can't really clean up, because if I start taking things apart from one another, then it's a problem. But if everything's like really spread out and there's like a little space between each thing, then I could take the blocks over here and I could take the cards over here, and everything is seen as separate. And this is a big discussion in the postgame, always defining what is called a mixture, what's not a mixture. When is something considered mixed together? When is it not? That's a big discussion. Okay, Chizki Amar, here we have a case which is not so relevant to us, I don't think. Habar Turmasim Tov Psolos Shalahen. One who selects lupin beans from their waist, chayav. You are chayav. Okay, so a person takes lupin beans from their waist, you are chayav. Ask the Gemara, Lema Kisavar Chizkiya Ocham Tov Psolos Asur. Does that mean that taking food from waste is prohibited? Right? What's going on? Everyone holds you allowed to take the good from the bad. Why can't you take these lupin beans from their waist? Shani Turmusin, the Gemara says lupin beans are different to shalki le shiva zimni, because the way to make lupin beans, you have to boil them 7 times. Ilo shakli le masrach. And if you don't take the edible part from the shell, it spoils. Therefore, it's like waste from food. So basically, what we're saying over here is as follows. Since these lupin beans, before they're fully cooked, they actually go bad. They actually cause the entire dish to go bad, and therefore, if you don't take them out of the water, then it's going to be problematic. So therefore, the lupin beans are like they're both on the one hand seen as ochel, they're seen as good because they're food. At the same time, they could at times be seen as psolos. If you don't take them out of the mix, then they're going to be considered bad, and therefore you will not be able to take it out because you'll be taking the bad from the good. Okay, so again, there's so many different applications of borer. Whatever, we can't go into all the details right now, but something to think about, something to look into and learn more about, and we will pick up tomorrow. Have a great day.